Of, I think that it would make an amazing field trip, and we have trialled the trial a few months ago, and it worked out quite nicely with timings, but there is a relatively tight schedule that we need to kind of stick to. So we'll go over some of the health and safety and stuff as we go on, and a plan for the day when the other family turn up. But for now, if you were watching Creation Conversations last night, you will notice that we talked about this fossil here. This is one of the petrified tree fossils. It's a cross section, so there's the tree there, it's been sliced through, and it's from the Isle of Portland in the UK down south. We went there on our Rocks Cry Out convention trip, and you remember I spoke about this because this was buried in limestone, so it has been calcified, it's been preserved in calcite. That's the mineral that it's been used to preserve it, and you can actually have a look inside and you can see all of the crystals that are inside there, all of the calcite crystals. And one of the reasons that we brought this up last night, there's a very large Portland tree stump there, fossil tree stump there. One of the reasons that we brought it up is because one of the criticisms we'd had in the past, and it was one of the creation researchers writing a response to a pastor who said that calcification has nothing to do with fossilization. And you know that he doesn't really know what he's talking about, because fossilization is not a specific term. Fossilization just means in a hole, or to be dug up. And today we view it as a more specific term, as in it's a creature from the past, or an organism from the past that's been preserved, but it tells you nothing about how that creature has been preserved. In fact, calcification tells you nothing about how the creature has been preserved. Calcification is purely telling you what mineral is being used to preserve it, calcite or calcium carbonate, right? What you need are terms like petrified or permineralized and these kind of things. So petrified means turned to stone, permineralized means preserved in stone. So permineralized is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with dinosaur bones. They are still there, but they have been infilled and entrapped and encased, permeated with minerals. And if that mineral is calcite, then it's been calcified, it's calcification. So it tells you nothing about how the fossils have been formed, everything about the type of material that is being used. So why are we talking about this fossil when we're on a Tites and Mites and fossil fights field trip? Well, stalactites and stalagmites are predominantly found having been formed using the material calcium carbonate or calcification. And just like with the fossils, a lot of critics will say, well, the stalactites and stalagmites that you see growing under bridges or so on and so forth have got nothing to do with the stalactites and stalagmites that you see growing in caves, because they must take hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to form. Well, you've got your books with you, and the idea of the books is that they kind of help assist you as you go along. They're not designed to be filled out like a worksheet, they don't get marked, but there are questions for you to think about as we go forward. So when we ask questions like, well, what is meant by rock or mineral? Are they specific terms, or what do they tell you about the thing which you're holding? Well, rock means hard, stone means hard. So it's something that has turned hard. Something that's petrified is something that has been turned to stone, and you know that because it's hard, it's stone, it's heavy. When you ask questions like, what's the traditional explanation? Well, the idea with this limestone is that very slowly, over vast periods of time, hundreds of thousands of years, calcareous ooze built up on the seafloor until you end up burying a tree. Okay, a few questions. Number one, what is a tree doing standing upright in the middle of the seafloor? Number two, how many years would it take to just bury this tree, if those rates are accurate? The answer is hundreds of thousands of years. And yet you have beautifully preserved trees standing upright through seashell-filled limestone. Something doesn't quite add up here. So the main thing we're talking about today is a process. It's a process behind the fossils, and it's a process which is seen in these stalactites and stalagmites. So we're going to be starting here looking at some examples. We're going to be looking at the stalactite machine, and we're going to be going down the road to Chirk, where we can see examples of these fast stalactites and apply the process which we've learned here to real world examples, both in Chirk and in Sigham, in the copper mines down there. So it's got what to do with the minerals, not necessarily what to do with how it's actually been buried. By the way, a lot of the research that you'll see has gone into tides and mites and fossil finds. I know most of you have probably got this, but it really does go a lot more into the scientific detail. Okay, page, I haven't labelled the pages, that's useful. A mighty problem, that's the one we want, a mighty problem, if you have your page. There's a few quotes on here. Consider the following quotes. Quote number 1 is from the all-reliable source wikipedia.org. It says the average growth rate is 0.13 millimetres or 0.0051 inches a year. The quickest growing stalactites are those formed by fast flowing water rich in calcium carbonate and carbon dioxide. These can grow at a rate of 3 millimetres per year. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, and yes, I know it's Wikipedia, but that is the generally accepted terms. If you go into the technical literature, these are the rates which are often promoted. The idea that the average growth rate for a stalactite is 0.13 millimetres per year. Now, when they talk about average growth rate, they're talking about stalactites and stalagmites in caves. They're talking about the things that are supposed to take hundreds of thousands of years to form. When they talk about the fastest ones with fast flowing water with calcium carbonate and carbon dioxide, they say these things, like the ones under the bridges that you see, like the ones we'll see at Chirk Canal Tunnel, they say that these can grow at the astonishing rate of 3 millimetres a year. Well, we need to ask some questions about this, because the Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 to test all things and only hold fast to what is good. So we can do some testing, both with real world stalactites as well as with some of the experiments and the examples of fast growing stalactites. But look at quote number 2. The average upper rate, or the upper average rate for cave limestone stalactite growth is 10 centimetres per what? 1,000 years, with a lower growth rate outside of tropical areas. That's something which is extremely slow, just 10 centimetres per 1,000 years. The time, this is quote 3, the time for stalactite growth also has to allow for time for the cave to dissolve in the first place, which is also a very slow process, sometimes on the order of tens of millions of years. And you can see the title of the book that that's quoted from, the Counter-Creationism Handbook. So we are dealing with something that is quite serious here, because the argument is simple. It takes vast periods of time to grow stalactites and stalagmites. It takes even longer to erode the cave away in the first place for you to be able to grow the stalactites and stalagmites. Therefore, the world is simply too old for the Bible to be true. So if you have a look at this giant Chinese stalactite, which we had donated to us over here, it's a pretty big beast. Right, stalactite hangs down. Stalagmite grows up. How do you remember that? Or how do I remember that? Well, the stalactites have to hold on really tight to the ceiling because they're hanging down. The stalagmites are growing up, and if they keep on growing, they might one day reach the ceiling. That's how I remember it, right? But this is actually a stalactite. It's one that hangs down. Yes, it is upside down. It's the wrong way up. It's looking very stalagmite-y, but it's extremely heavy, and we haven't been able to work out a way of attaching it to the ceiling yet. But this is a giant natural Chinese stalactite from a cave in China. Look at the size of it, look at the weight of it. Now, if your average growth is, what, 10 centimetres every 1,000 years, how many 1,000 years did it take to grow this? Well, you can probably work it out with a nice little, work out the volume and the weight and da-da-da-da-da. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years to grow this stalactite. And the argument is simple. If this really took hundreds of thousands of years to grow, there's no way that the Bible can be true, because the earth is just simply too old for it to be accurate. And we've got other examples as well in our 2 cases here. There's 2 slightly thinner cases each side of real life stalactites and stalagmites, including some examples of things that have grown rather quickly. So you can see one of them in the cases over there. I'll just bring a couple of the examples out over here. The first one is this tight pipe. Now, if you look at stalactites and stalagmites and you take a cross-section through, Susie, could you grab a cut stalactite from the shelf over there?
Oh, yeah.
If you take the natural stalactites and you cut them through, you will see layering. And this is simple. Here's the cut stalactite. You'll see the layering. It's simple because each layer is a layer of calcium carbonate that it's deposited as it is growing. It's a bit like a tree ring kind of idea. And what we have here is something that looks very, very similar to that. Very, very similar to the stalactite type material. But then surrounding it is a metal pipe. Because this is actually part of a metal pipe, a big long metal pipe from the Karlovy in the Czech Republic. And they installed these pipes, and after about a month they realised that there wasn't as much water coming through the pipes as there should be. So they dig down after 2 months and try and do some tests, and after 3 months they've removed the pipe completely, because what they've found is in just 3 months all of this material has actually built up inside the pipe. Now the Karlovy has got hot mineral springs. The hot mineral springs are full of a mineral called aragonite. Aragonite is a form of calcium carbonate. That's what the colour is coming from, because it's got iron in it. And you've got this entire stalactite type growth which is built up inside the metal pipe in just 3 months. Now that should tell you one thing. The average rate has not necessarily got anything to do with reality, because how do you get an average rate? You observe it in the present and then you extrapolate backwards. But what did they say in the quote? I think it was quote number 2. What do the fastest growing stalactites grow with? Fast flowing water. When you go down Cheddar Gorge today and you see the amazing stalactites and stalagmites, how much fast flowing water do you see? Not a lot. So if you're going to take the average rate of what's happening today and extrapolate backwards, you're really being dishonest at best, or well, misguided at best, dishonest at worst, right? Because you will freely admit that they grow faster if there's more water. In fact, you can go to Cheddar Gorge and you see the massive cascading, waterfall basically of stalactite, and they say water would have flowed down here abundantly in the past. And then just around the corner they say, based on modern rates, we know it must have taken hundreds of thousands of years to form this. Well, I'm sorry, but you've already know that the modern rates or the modern conditions are not how it was in the past. Because you're still falling into the same trap of assuming that the present is the key to the past, and therefore using the present to understand the past. But on the first page of your handbooks, you'll see that there's a quote from the man who introduced the concept of the present is the key to the past, which is Charles Lyell. And it says that he popularized the idea of the present is the key to the past in order to free science from Moses. In other words, to get God out of people's thinking. So don't be surprised that if you use that philosophy, you will end up with an argument which gets rid of scripture. Because that's what the argument ultimately tries to do. That's what it ultimately dives down into. Okay, before we head off, there's a few other things to talk about. You all right?
You're right.
Feel free to come in and have a look around. We're just going to a field trip at the moment. We'll be heading off.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so what we also have here, this is from a place called Matlock, Kent. And it's a similar thing that's going on with the stuff at the Karlovy. This is a bird's nest, a natural bird's nest, who's laid its nest a little bit too close to some dripping water. And you know how quickly it's actually completely fossilised because the baby birds haven't had a chance to actually hatch out yet. So it's been pretty quick indeed. This is what is known as permineralised. Now it's still calcification because what is the mineral that it's been used? Calcite, calcium carbonate, right? So still calcification, but technically it's permineralisation where minerals have permeated the material, the bird's nest, and have completely impregnated, completely entrapped it, and completely fossilised it. So again, an example of fast growth. But did this take 10 centimetres per 1,000 years? Well, no, there's a lot more than 10 centimetres worth of material here, and it actually happened before the baby bird had a chance to hatch out. So you start to see examples of fast calcification. But then you get arguments like, well, this isn't exactly the same as the stuff that you get in the caves because the chemicals are different, or the crystals are different, or the conditions are different. And that's when we get into a bit more of the research where we can start comparing things. So I'll be taking a few examples of our natural stalactites down to Chirk Canal Tunnel because we're going to be comparing things. And I'm going to show you an example of that now that we've collected from both. I'm going to grab this stalactite out of the bottom here. And I want you to have a look at and compare it with the stalactite that we took from Chirk Canal Tunnel. This is one that grew at maximum in about 150 years. This is one that supposedly grew at a rate of 10 centimeters per 1,000 years. And if you actually compare the two, can you see the similarity between the feather edging? You see the little bits that are sticking out the side? Now this is something which is supposed to be unique to caves. They're called Tites when they actually grow out sideways instead of downwards. It's supposed to be unique conditions that are unique to cave conditions, and that's it. Yet we're already seeing these growing fast. So even just by the physical difference, the morphological similarities, you can tell that there is actually comparison between the natural ones and between the modern quick ones. So we'll be able to see that. But then you can get really complicated because you can start doing different tests to actually prove that these stalactites are also chemically the same. Not just from things like pH, measuring how alkaline, how acidic, or how the acidity or the alkalinity of it, but you can also do things like X-ray diffraction, and that's where we get, if you get your books open. So you've got, so you've got some pictures, you've got some examples of the fast-growing stalactites from around the world. We've got stuff that has grown out of drainage pipes, we've got stuff that's fossilizing stuff, we've got the Harper Hill stuff which are fossilizing the feathers, you've got fossil socks as well, that has happened really quickly. But if you have a look at the naturally fast Tites page, you can actually see this guy is Randall, who used to head up creation research. That stalactite which he's holding is actually just on the display unit just behind there as well. So these are in old limestone quarries. That has happened since the mine has closed down. This happened in about 3 years. You look at the one that John is standing next to at the bottom here. This is one that happened in about 3 years, an enormous almost like cascading stalagmite that's flown down over the top of it, which has happened since the road cut was actually made, so extremely quickly indeed. So what is the standard explanation for limestone calcium carbonate formation? It takes vast periods of time, whether it's in the form of stalactite or stalagmite, or whether it's in the form of chalk or limestone deposit or fossil wood. It's supposed to take a large amount of time. The claim for the fast tides is that these are not the same. They are actually different. And that's when we need to get into some debates and some of the science. Look at the critics and what they say. Bridge/building stalactites, stalagmites made out of what is basically cement is 10 times more soluble than calcium carbonate, which comes from a 5% gypsum in the concrete mix. That's what they say. So, okay, are there any ways that we can bust this quote? Well, yes, you can get natural stalagmites and stalactites forming very quickly. These is not from concrete. This is not from concrete. These are from natural limestone caverns, and yet the conditions are right for them to actually go quickly. Well, if you look at the X-ray diffraction results, what we did is we took some of these fast stalactites from things growing under bridges like this, and you put them through an X-ray diffraction, and that goes through and it sends a special light, and it looks at the internal makeup of stalactites and stalagmites. What do we find? 99 to 100% calcium carbonate. Less than 1% of it is actually cement. Less than 1% is actually iron. Now, what does that tell you? Well, number one, cement has actually changed its form. And when we go to Chirk Canal Tunnel, you'll see that there's cement in the actual bricks that are holding it together. Yet when you test it, because cement is extremely alkaline, like over 10, yet the stuff that's coming, the water that's coming out of these stalactites is about 8. That's much, much closer to neutral, much, much closer to calcium carbonate than it is to cement. So the cement has changed. Both the pH tells you that, as well as the X-ray diffraction. It's nearly 100% calcium carbonate. It's purely natural.